we're going to need a bigger tent, obviously. My name's Mark Littlewood. I'm the Director of Popular Conservatism, or PopCon. There should be some leaflets on your seats. If you are not already signed up to our mailing lists already, A, shame on you. B, there are a couple of QR codes on the back, so just scan those to make sure that you either join our Conservative WhatsApp group or our regular newsletter. I'm going to start by introducing the panel, then the topic, in the order in which they're going to speak. And I'm going to ask each of our panellists to speak for no more than 5 minutes, which should be ample time to answer the extremely simple question on the board behind you. But if they haven't done so brilliantly within 20 minutes, I'm going to come over to you to help them solve the problem and the dilemma and work out the right path back to power. So on my far right is Lord David Frost, Conservative peer, commentator.
Hard right.
My hard right, he corrects me, is Lord David Frost. Brexit supremo, Conservative peer, regular commentator in the national media, has written extensively about how Conservatives need to rethink to get back to power. On my immediate right is Annabel Denham, the deputy comment editor of The Telegraph, who has suggested in one of her columns that it would be suicide for the Conservatives to make leadership elections a scheduled annual event, I think is a fair way of putting it. On my immediate left is Wendy, the Right Honourable Wendy Morton MP, true blue Conservative and one of the survivors of July the 4th last year. And now Ian's going to complain now, because I've now got to say on my far left is Iain Dale, commentator, LBC broadcaster. And I'm going to ask them to speak in that order. Let me just set the scene, because we do have the best part of an hour to solve this problem. So with the combined brain power on the panel in this room, it would be disappointing if we haven't worked it out entirely by 3 o'clock. But I think it's fair to say that if 12 or 15 months ago, in the aftermath of the general election, you'd been told that by October 2025, Keir Starmer would only have 11% of the population approving of his role as Prime Minister. Labour would be at 20% in the opinion polls. The government would have a net approval rating of minus 60%. If that was all the information you had to go on a year or so ago, you would have thought, well, it's plain sailing then, isn't it? A Conservative majority looks like it's nailed on. As long as we don't drop the ball, it should be easy. The pathway back to power barely needs to be piloted. Of course, that isn't quite where we find ourselves. And probably over the last year, the Conservatives have had as torrid a time of it as the Labour Party in terms of public opinion. So how do we put that right? What do we need to do? And what is the pathway back to power to get rid of this wretched government at the earliest opportunity? That's the question I've set our panellists and to you. David, can you kick us off?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for asking me. I've only got 5 minutes, so I'm going to be quite forthright and clear. I think the mood at this conference so far is far too positive, and I think we have to be honest about the situation that we find ourselves in. 4 points. First, we've got to start acknowledging the terrible mess we're in. In 2019, we got 14 million votes. 2024, we got 6.8 million. About half of those went to Reform, another 2 to 3 million abstained, 1 to 2 million went to Labour. Now we've got about 4.5 million voters. We've lost 10 million voters since the 2019 election. In an electorate of 48 million, we've got 4.5 million people supporting us. This is an appalling situation for a mainstream party. Second, the torpor of the party over the last year has meant that the obvious strategy of trying to recreate a proper, strong Conservative party is now much more difficult, because there already is another one and it's doing better than we are in the polls. So it's very easy to understand why people might say, well, why bother? It already exists. Third point, we aren't showing we understand why things went wrong in 2019 to 24, so nobody really believes that we'll avoid the mistakes next time, and nobody is listening to us as a result. Fourth point, everything is getting worse, and it has done so consistently since November last year. We were on 25% of the vote then, we're on 16% of the vote now. And now, so no prescription for the party works unless we accept that the situation is extremely bad and we're on the edge of ceasing to exist as a mainstream party. So what do we do? Now, some people seem to think we should try for what I call a sort of German FDP strategy, a kind of niche party that's in favour of free markets and a bit of liberalism. The German FDP has just, I think, ceased to be in the Bundestag, and is always on the margins of it. It isn't a viable strategy for us. We need to create a proper mainstream Conservative party, which means moving to the right on policy and trying to appeal to some extent to our left on grounds of competence, difficult though that's going to be, and to an extent on self-interest. Now, what does that mean? Just a few quick points. First of all, we have to not just apologise and set out a proper Conservative programme. We have to be clear about what the margins of the party are. What are the boundaries of being in the Conservative Party? What does conservatism mean? And if you don't like that, then you can't be in the party. That is the test for membership. And personally, I'd like to see some disavowals of those at high level in the party who took us down the mistaken path of the last few years. Second, set out a Conservative programme. I won't go into detail now, I've written lots about this, but nationhood, rebuilding the institutions of the country, getting control of the borders, market reform, getting the size of the state down. Third, communication. We've really got to explain what we're doing much better than we are. When Lady Thatcher was in opposition, the model that we're often told is being followed, she communicated the whole time. She simplified down her propositions. If you read her early speeches, they're very, very clear on principle what she stood for. We need to keep saying this again and again and again and again till people start hearing us. Fourth, finally, I know this may be unpopular here, but I think we need to stop rubbishing reform, or at least stop rubbishing people who vote for reform. We too often we look to the country like we've got some sort of right to vote on the right. We look entitled, like, you know, we this is our role, and somehow these people have come along and taken it from us, and isn't it unfair and isn't it unjust? People in reform, largely people who vote for reform, are Conservatives. They're on the right. Many of us know them. We all know this. If we want to rebuild the right, we aren't going to do it by rubbishing them and telling ourselves they're stupid for having gone across. We need to rebuild and reach out. Now, I'm not convinced any of these things are actually going to be done, I'm afraid, which is a reason why I'm rather negative. But I think we have to be honest. We have to be clear, however difficult the decisions are. If there's only one way out of the mess, you have to take those decisions, and the sooner we do, the better. Thanks.
David, I knew you'd rise to the job I set you of cheering us up and telling us there was nothing to worry about, so thank you very much for that. Annabel, what's your analysis and your prescription?
Well, obviously we're meeting at a time of extreme political volatility, not just for the British right, but for British politics in general. And it's one that could prompt years of us having a multi-party system where there are around 5 parties vying for our votes, and none of the old assumptions really hold anymore. And so to that end, I fear that trying to predict what might happen in the future, or what the future of the right might be, is a fool's errand. Nevertheless, I'd just make a few points. The first is that I think the Tories need to keep a cool head. While Reform is certainly shaking up the political landscape, they've got an enormous amount of work to do in order to professionalise and prepare for potentially being in power at some stage. And I'm yet to be convinced that they will have any more joy in taking on the blob, the activist lawyers and the judges and the civil servants than the Conservative Party did. I think that their economic agenda at the moment is pretty incoherent. They seem to want more NHS spending. They've advocated lifting the two-child benefit cap and part nationalising our water industry at the same time as promising that there will be tax cuts, and they want to go for growth. That said, I very much echo David's remarks that the Tories cannot complain that they left a void, and that was filled by Reform, Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. For years they talked right, but they governed left. They abandoned their core principles in virtually every conceivable area, from the size of the state to personal responsibility and individual freedom. And the British public ultimately told successive Conservative governments that they wanted freebies and bailouts and lockdowns, and the Tories just gave in, just as they gave in to the Progressives, who said that we ought to throw open our borders and take a much more relaxed view of illegal migration. But we are where we are. I just wanted to touch on the likelihood, I think, at the moment in 2025 of a Tory reform pact, because we hear a lot about this at the moment. I'm deeply sceptical. Reform is polling at around 34%, and with every passing day, it feels as though they gather more momentum. So why would they agree to a pact when they think that they can win without one? What does the Tory party offer them that they don't feel they can simply take by force? And there's also the small matter that Farage's strategic aim is to destroy the Conservative Party so that Reform can become the hegemonic right-wing party. So why would they hinder that? The only way that they might do is if the Tories get back to something like 25% or above in the polls, but even then at this stage, I would bet against it. Now, you might argue that were the Tories to change leader, that could materially change matters, but I doubt it very much. More on which later. The voters who've abandoned the Tories for reform are incredibly bitter about the Boris wave. They don't trust the party and indicate that they're not interested in returning. So many Tory MPs may find that they have an important decision to make next summer. Do they stick within the party and commit to a long slog of remaking and redefining it? Or do they think that if they want office, they are better off jumping ship and joining Reform? There's also the question of whether Reform would take them, because Farage will need to be careful about taking on board too many switchers. As Mark said in his intro, I have previously suggested that now is not the time for regicide, and I still stick by it. It's true, as David pointed out, that over the last year or so, the Tories' polling has dropped from around 25% to 16%, but we don't know the counterfactual. A lot of this is because Nigel Farage has absorbed so much of the political oxygen. We don't know that any other leader would have had any more joy. I think it's easy to forget the truly lamentable situation that Kemi inherited when she became leader of the opposition last November. The party was shell-shocked and wounded and deeply disunited. And I'm not sure that there is currently a potential candidate who isn't closely associated in people's minds with the 14 years of Tory disappointment. And in any case, were the party to try and do this after perhaps the locals in May, that is a very long time for Kemi Badenoch's replacement to hang on. Despite Nigel Farage's insistence, I'm doubtful that there will be a general election before 2029. So no, I don't think that the path back to power involves another leadership election, at least not now. In terms of what I think they ought to do, they need to rebuild the grassroots party. They need a rhetoric that is actually conservative and about continuity and stability and security and actually getting things to work. And I would just finally raise the question, because we do talk so much about the future of the right, but what are the future of the left? Because they will be divided for the foreseeable as well. So as I said at the start, I think we're in for a period of very disorderly politics, as in 1916 to 1931. But I do think that if the Tories can survive the next election, then they do have a chance, because reform may split itself under the stress of governing. So lots to think about.
Annabel, thank you very much indeed. I think lots of people are saying we now live in a multi-party system, but a Tory MP who will remain anonymous, when I was talking to him about we now live in a multi-party system, said no, we don't really, Mark, it's still a two-party system. The problem is the two parties are Reform and the Liberal Democrats. I don't think it's quite there yet. We may be going through a realignment. Wendy, what's your take on it? You're the only elected member of the panel, so you know what it's like for the other parties to be breathing down your neck. You survived, but what's our route back? We need 3 times as many people like you if we're going to form a credible government in the future.
Absolutely, and thank you, Mark. And it's good to be here again. And I sat on the panel last year, and I was reflecting on what we were talking about last year, and here we are again. There is no doubt in my mind that, look, I am one of the lucky ones. I feel like an endangered species in the West Midlands. I'm the only one left in the Black Country. I got across the line, but too many didn't. We've lost talent, we've lost expertise, I've lost a lot of friends. It was a brutal election, but we have to remember that we are the oldest political party in history. And to survive this long, that means we have to rebuild, we have to re-engage. It doesn't just happen, but we have to keep working at it. But for me, there is a piece about policy, but there's also a massive piece of work around rebuilding trust with the electorate. We had a by-election in my constituency a few weeks ago. We rather hoped that we would be able to hold it, and we didn't. It was another brutal night for us locally, and we worked our socks off. The reason I share this with you is that I know there have been some successes locally in by-elections across the country. I was at a very upbeat LGA event the other evening. But, you know, it is demoralising when you lose a by-election. But the one message that I took from this is that the anger on the doorsteps that I used to feel when I was a candidate in the North East a number of years ago has gone, but people still do not trust us. We had lots of conversations with people. We looked them in the whites of their eyes, and we still couldn't get it across the line. So, re-engaging, rebuilding from the grassroots upwards. And for me, it is going to be about doing the hard yards. And I don't mind if this conference has got a positive edge to it, because I want every Conservative member and activist to go out there and remember that we are a Conservative party, and we need to go out there and rebuild and regain trust with a path back to power. Whether we get the answer of what that path back to power is today, Mark, I'm not quite sure. But we have to remain positive that we will find it, no matter how big that task is. Because I think, for me, I reflect on why I got back when I joined the Conservative Party. We should all remember why we joined the Conservative Party. Why do we go out and do what we do? Why are we spending 3 days in Manchester here today? It may be because you're listening to a great panel of people, there are some great speeches, it may be the wine, it may be the fringe events, a whole host of reasons.
Mainly the wine.
Mainly the wine. Although I don't think there's as much of it at this conference.
There you go. Tough times.
A lot of wine. Cost of living crisis. But I think it's important that we remember why we're Conservative, what our values are, and we need to restate those values, and we need to set out what our vision is for this country. Because I think the problem is when we leave or we create a void, it's a space for others to fill with their messages. And so Thatcher always knew we're at our best when we're a broad church. But at the moment, we're very much a splintered church, and we are very much splintered. I don't think we fully understand where we sit, but we will not. We have to reunite the right. Otherwise, we just create a gift to the left. And we've spoken today about the polls. Who can imagine where Labour are at the moment? They're languishing in the polls, and we are not gaining from it. So let's not give them any more gifts. And what we see is the weak leadership. We see an ineffectual government. They are hell-bent on their own ideology and unpicking what we did in government. So we must not remain in that position as being a gift to the left. We cannot leave that void for them to fill. Now, I hope that we've had some announcements in the last few days. I hope that is all part of our rebuilding and our moving forward. But nothing for me replaces that need to communicate and to engage with people. And I think that's where, as members of Parliament, we have to remember who we are and what we're there to do. Represent. I'm a member of the Conservative Party, but I'm there to represent my constituency. And if that means I have to spend day after day on those green benches asking questions of Labour and standing up to defend my values as a Conservative and what matters to my constituency, well, that's where I'm going to be. So let's not give up hope, but let's just know that we've got quite a journey ahead of us, but we can only do it when we work together.
Wendy, thanks very much. Iain, what's your diagnosis and prescription for us?
Well, I try to be a relentlessly optimistic person, and on the basis that, as they said in House of Cards, nothing is forever. In politics, nothing is forever. When you get to my age, you realise that politics is very cyclical. We thought we'd got rid of inflation. We thought we'd got rid of the trade union influence. We thought we'd got rid of left-wing Labour leaders. They all came back. There's nothing that says the Conservative Party can't come back to power. I'm not sure it'll happen at the next election, but I mean, we are in a bit of a similar situation to 1997. We did come back to power. Admittedly, it took 13 years to do it. So how do we do that? Well, not by whinging about the unfairness of electoral systems, the unfairness of the media, whatever. You get back to power by restating your values and the policies that you think the country need. Now, we can't go back to the 1980s and lift Thatcherism from the 1980s and put it into 2025. We're in a very, very different world. But like you, Wendy, I remember in the 1978 Conservative Conference when I was 15.
You're that old?
Yeah, I am. I know, good skin, you see. I remember watching Margaret Thatcher's speech and thinking, well, not only has she diagnosed the problems of the country, and those of you who are old enough to remember that, I mean, it was a pretty horrible place to live in 1978, she diagnosed some solutions. And that's what I think we've sort of seen for the first time since Kemi became leader at this conference, some of the solutions. Now, I might not agree with some of them, but she's using evidence-based policy. And this is how I think the party regains trust, because far too often, and particularly in the last year of Rishi Sunak's administration, you can't say there weren't enough policies, but how many of them were actually thought through? And when Labour say, well, they had this policy, that policy, they weren't costed, I'm afraid they're right. They weren't. Well, we can't fall into that trap again. So whether you agree with coming out of the ECHR or not, she's got the evidence. I think they've gone too far in saying that if you're a candidate at the next election, you have to sort of sign your name in blood that you will continue to support that. Now, many of you will think she's done the right thing. I completely accept that. And I accept that any Conservative candidate needs to stand by a manifesto. But if you're going to try and recreate this broad church that brought Thatcher to power, that brought Blair to power, that brought Reagan to power, that brought Clinton to power, you've got to do things which appeal to your opponents on both flanks. And at the moment, it's one-way traffic. Everything seems to be designed to get back people who might possibly of going to reform. There will be people in this room who have gone through this dilemma. Do I stick with the Conservatives or do I go to reform? So yes, she has to try and reinforce that flank and stop any of you thinking of going to reform over the next couple of years. But there are other people on the other side of the party who also are thinking, well, can I really support coming out of the ECHR? Can I support the abolition of net zero policies, etc., etc.? And those people also have a right to be heard and to be considered in this. Because I don't believe the Conservative Party can win a majority at the next election without those people too. Now, if Margaret Thatcher could be Prime Minister for 11 and a half years and have people like Jim Lester and Ken Clarke in her parliamentary party, as well as the likes of John Carlyle, who was known as the member for Bloemfontein South, I mean, why have we got to a stage where, unless you are seen to be ideologically pure, you have no place in the Conservative Party? I am fed up to the back teeth of being described on social media as a closet Liberal Democrat. Because if I were a Liberal Democrat, I would agree with their policies. I don't agree with most of their policies. I've just written a biography of Margaret Thatcher, for God's sake. I mean, I remain the same kind of Conservative that I always was, socially liberal, fiscally conservative. If there's no place for people like me in this party, well, God help the lot of you, is all I say.
I'm on the basis of the comments they've made, I'm going to ask each of our panellists one follow-up question each. But then I'm going to come to the floor. We've got two microphones, I think, one with Chris over there, one with Ted over there. So percolate a question in your mind, and I'll probably take them in batches of 3 and then come back to the panel. So be prepared to stick your hand up in the air, and I'll take questions from you. Iain, the interesting analysis. Of course, you need a broad church to win an election. You can't be sort of sectarian purist ideologues. That's the role for a think tank, not an electoral machine that needs to garner north of 30, perhaps 40% of the vote. But where are your limits on that? And do you think a difference between now and the 80s is, if you like, the defining issues and matters for the British electorate they want a very clear line on? Immigration, for example. You can have grades of different thoughts about immigration policy, but you can't have a mainstream party being, on the one hand, very liberal on immigration and very strict on immigration. There needs to be a line on the top issues of the day. And I think probably what held the wets and the dries together back in the 70s and 80s was there was a general view that we needed substantial economic and market reform. You could argue about how far you went along that spectrum, but there weren't any Conservatives saying, actually, I think we need to nationalise more industries, for example. That wouldn't have been part of the broad church.
I'm sure there were one or two.
There may have been one or two, but they would have been hounded out, ultimately. So how do you create a broad church while still giving the electorate some fairly binary signals on the top issues of the day?
Well, I mean, immigration is an interesting one because it's clearly the number one or number two political issue that the electorate are concerned about at the moment. I mean, Nigel Farage has been very successful in selling that. And of course, with the track record of the last government, it's quite difficult for Kemi Badenoch, who was a member of the last government, as was obviously Robert Jenrick as immigration minister. It's not that easy for them to say, yeah, I know we got it wrong before, but we'll get it right next time. This is where the whole trust issue comes in, as Wendy said. But I think Farage has overreached himself on this indefinite leave to remain policy, effectively saying, yeah, we're going to consider chucking people out who've been legally here for decades. I mean, in some cases, 40 or 50 years. Now, if you are one of those 3 million people who voted in the Brexit referendum for the first time because you felt that it was actually relevant to you, and you're thinking of voting in the next election, and you're probably thinking of voting for Farage, I suspect that anyone with a decent mind, a fair mind, will think, ooh, that's gone a bit far, hasn't it? I mean, I know some of these people. I'm one of my neighbours. He's been here 30 years. Surely he can't be chucked out. So there is nothing to say that Farage isn't going to do something similar in other policy areas as well. And yes, Conservatives have to have a broad understanding that secure borders is a very important policy, and I certainly don't resile from that. What I resile from, though, is the language that some of our leading politicians are using about immigration. They're trying to ape the language that For Reform are using. And if you make speeches or statements where you call all Muslims that they're from a medieval culture or an alien background, all of them, not just some, all of them, and I will accept some are, but you lose the right to enter the debate, because that kind of language, and it was Robert Jenrick that used that kind of language, that has consequences. Do you remember when Boris Johnson made those remarks about Muslim women looking like letterboxes? Now, he didn't mean that malevolently, but I had callers from Muslim women the next day saying, well, I've just been abused in the street because he's given license to people to do this. And I'm afraid that's what Robert did in that statement. And I think it's an absolute disgrace that that should happen. So I'm partly interested in the language of it.
And the tone. And the tone.
You can be in favour of, you can have very strong immigration policies, and I support strong immigration policies, but don't make immigrants who come to this country perfectly legally. I was talking to somebody last night from the Middle East who's here perfectly, he came here to study, wants to stay, wants to apply for British citizenship, but he says, I've got to prepare a plan C or plan D now, because if Farage gets in, I know I won't be welcome here. Well, we can't be part of that as a Conservative Party.
Okay. Wendy, I wanted to pick your brains a bit on when do you think the Conservative Party gets a hearing again? You're sort of suggesting people don't want to listen to us at the moment. That's replayed back to me on the media every time. In the interview I did this morning, the Talk TV presenter said, well, yeah, but nobody cares what the Conservative Party thinks. And I was like, well, you haven't invited me onto your show to explain what the Conservative Party thinks in my best way, so somebody does. But on the doorstep, do you get the feeling that we're just on the naughty step for a while? And, you know, if you go and knock on these same doors again in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months' time, perhaps forgiveness has kicked in. Or is it deeper than that? Have these people just decided, I'm never going to buy your product again, don't darken my door again? Or is it just that the wounds haven't quite healed from the last general election, but, you know, give it a bit of time and time will be the greatest healer? Or does something more need to be done than just patience before the electorate will listen to us?
I think, and that goes to the nub of really what we're talking about this afternoon, which is the views of the electorate. I don't think just being patient and just waiting and seeing is enough, because you then leave that space, that void for others to fill. I think people were really, really cheesed off with us at the last election because they felt, and I had it said to me many, many times, and you probably did in this room, you know, you lot in Westminster, you were all falling out amongst each other. So there is, I think that's at the heart of some of the problem, which is why that rebuilding of trust matters, which is why when I talk about rebuilding from the grassroots, that is why I mean it is within our own party, but it is out there on the doorsteps. But it is about doing the hard yards, which is, as a member of Parliament, it's knocking on doors, but it's not just that. It's being there and representing the constituents that elected you to serve in Westminster. And Mark, it maybe seems like I'm teaching people to suck eggs, but I'm not. I've fought marginal seats, I've fought a no-hope seat. I have a seat which when I first won it I thought was a safe seat. I do not believe there is such a thing as a safe seat anymore. So it is literally going out there. What is it that people, what is bothering people in the local communities? What do they want me to fight for? I think I know, but I'm not so arrogant as to think that I've got all the answers. We have big issues on our green belt. I'll fight for those, but I also want to know that I'm fighting the right issues for my constituents. I also think, though, at the heart of where we're at in politics today, and this hasn't just happened overnight, nor has it happened since the last general election, is people are feeling that there's a sense of unfairness. And I think this was building before Brexit. It was part of that. Levelling up to me was a great thing that we need to do, and we still do. When I grew up, it was talked about in terms of the north-south divide. If you grew up in the north, You often just wanted to get away and go to the south because you felt that's where the better work, the better paid jobs were, the career opportunities. So some of that wasn't right even then. So we have to really understand our country, listen to them, listen to people, engage with them, and say, don't be arrogant about it, but we cannot leave it to chance. We cannot leave it just to time. We have to go out there, and it comes back to restating our values, for me.
Annabel, do you think there's, and it would be difficult, I suppose, to put a precise number on it, but do you think there's a tipping point for the Conservative Party, a point at, let's say, support in the polls where it just falls so low, or parliamentary representation that falls so low, you're just out of the game? I mean, I'm trying to wonder whether the leader of the Liberal Party in 1945 might have been thinking, well, we're not going to win many seats, but you wait until the electorate get a taste of Clem Attlee's socialism, we'll be right back at them. But of course, the Liberal Party only won 9 seats or something, and you're just holed below the waterline at this point. Now, I've sort of heard this idea that some Conservative presence might cling on, the Reform government, if there were to be one, might implode. But the route back, if the Conservatives fall any lower in public and therefore parliamentary support, at some point just renders you into a fringe party where you can't just incrementally build back. Would you agree? And if you do agree, do you think we're close to that tipping point?
Well, you can call me a naive optimist, Mark, but I think that the Tories have almost sunk as low as they're going to now at 16%, and that's because of the voters. Now, Lady Thatcher, of course, said the facts of life are conservative. It may not necessarily feel that way in 2025 Britain, but nevertheless, I think there is a decently sized voting bloc out there who do believe in a smaller state, in lower taxes, in the government being less involved and meddling less in our lives, who would like to see the Tories abandon the net zero project, who would like us to have better control of our borders, who probably believe that we need to have some kind of 1930 style rearmament and much better focus on defence in this country, that we must tackle welfare, all of these sorts of issues. And the voters are out there now. They're out there, and possibly, they're beyond the 15% that the Tories are at the moment in the polls. They just don't feel as though they've had representation over the last 14 years or so. So my hope and my expectation is that things won't fall much further.
This is the floor, you think?
I
thought 24% of the vote last July was the floor, but you think now we really have hit the floor, yeah?
And in another year's time,
right,
sunk even further.
Well,
now we're at the floor mark.
May next year is going to be ground zero.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, it could go below 16%. That's when the recovery really has to start.
Yeah, although interestingly, looking very, very long term, and we wouldn't have this amount of time to play with, it's pointed out to me earlier today that the demographic shifts with older people eventually shuffling off this mortar coil and younger people coming onto the electoral register, the natural trajectory at the moment is the Conservatives lose 0.5% a year without any changes in natural support, just by people entering and leaving the voting pool. David, the point I wanted to put to you was this detailed policy strategy, which seems to be that the pitch from Kemi and the party is in this political circus full of clowns everywhere. We're the only serious people. We're the only people you can be trusted to be ringmaster. Here is our 200-page peer-reviewed report on ECHR withdrawal and what we need to do about the Refugee Convention. There you go, serious, non-sloganeering stuff. I mean, James cleverly said just the other week, we're not chasing headlines. I mean, I kind of wish the party was, actually, but is that the right approach? Or is there a danger that after a year of looking into ECHR and immigration, and not quite sure where we've got to on climate change and carbon net zero, we do a lot of sort of think tank research, which kind of then reaches the conclusion that it turns out Nigel Farage was right all along?
I mean, I think that is the risk, yes, to some extent. I think the real problem is that it's just too slow. And what the right starting point would be to set out relatively quickly a set of principles for conservatism. I think actually you could get agreement on that pretty quickly. We all know what the core elements of conservatism are. Okay, so what does that mean in this current situation? What are the things we need to do? How are they implemented in real life today? That's really the question. The trouble is, the way we've approached it is we spend the best part of 6 months on one issue on the ECHR, and it's got us to a point, an answer which I think we all knew was kind of coming anyway. The Wolfson report is a good report, but it doesn't set out a plan for what should now happen next, and that still has to be worked up. Well, if you multiply that by the 20 or so major issues that we're dealing with, we're just going to kind of run out of time. It's obviously true that you don't need to set out absolutely detailed policy for the election in 3 years' time, but you do need to communicate a sense of where you're coming from. What is kind of driving you as a politician? What are your principles? What is your view of what this country should be like? How big should the state really be? Who has the right to stay in this country or not? How do you want to run the civil service? What about the NHS? What about net zero? What are the things that are driving you to policy conclusions? And I think that's what's not what's coming through at the moment, and I think that's probably a big part of the kind of trust problem, to be honest.
Can I just say something on that?
Very quickly, Ian, yeah.
Because I think that as a Conservative Party, we have to restate Conservative values. We can't just assume that people know that the Conservative Party is for free markets. I mean, there's a whole generation of people who've grown up, who are either teenagers now or in their 20s, who believe that the Conservative Party is fundamentally evil. I did a podcast the other day on my Thatcher book, 2 17-year-old hosts. I said, well, what did you think of Thatcher before we spent the last hour talking about her? Well, we were taught in school that she was evil. Now, if you restating the case for capitalism and free markets, I think is at the core of this. Sort of the whole freedom argument. And we don't. David's absolutely right. We don't have to have a sort of myriad of complicated policies. I mean, the policy today about abolishing business rates for small bits high street in the high streets, I think is a great one because people can relate to that. Why don't they just have a simple policy which won't cost any money? It's saying, right, the tax code is 20,000 pages long at the moment, the highest in history. Let's cut it back to whatever it was in 1997, which is probably about 5,000. Again, people think, oh, now that's a good idea. Who can possibly disagree with that? So there's some easy wins along the way if we play it right.
Okay, let me come over to the audience. I'll start on this side of the room. So, Chris, can I take these two gentlemen at the front, then the gentleman in the second row, then I'll come over to the other side. Just to remind you of my rules of conduct, you need to introduce yourself, you can make a comment, you can give a speech if you like, but a speech must be no more than 1 sentence in length. And whatever you say must end in a question mark. Richard.
Patient. For David, who would you kick out? And would you prefer Genic? And for Annabel, the reason why reform will get blobbed is basically the PopCon agenda by Starkey and Martin Littlewood. So how can we get them to take this agenda on?
Okay, thank you. Very direct questions. Then, gentleman just along the line, please introduce yourself, sir.
My name's Howard Nelson. I'm trying to frame this as a question on the statement. So do you agree with me? Do you agree with me that the answer to the question is to out-reform reform? Having said that, I do agree with Ian, and I think Ian is in the right place in terms of saying what the party should stand for. And somewhere between those two extremes, not that Ian's view is extreme, but it is to the right. It's to the right of the first answer I gave.
And then just behind you, gentleman there in the second row.
Thank you very much. Richard Walsh. I must say I do agree with every word that David said in terms of actually being realist. It's great to be an optimist, but we need to be a realist, particularly in chasing reform. Trust is a big issue. Does the panel agree that perhaps 2 ways of rescuing the party is, firstly, as Mark was hinting at, shifting the boundaries towards a wider party membership in terms of targeting young people and their values, and also building trust by showing the work that the councillors do locally, by showing that they care, showing that they listen, and show that they fight for their people. In that way, we can build up trust locally. The party nationally is not being listened to. We need to build it from the councillors up and to appeal to a wider range of demographics. Does the panel agree?
Very cunning way of giving a speech with a question mark at the end. So David and Annabel pick up on any of those points, but Richard's questions were directed exactly at you. David, who would you kick out if you need a clearer, narrower Conservative Party in some ways for the purpose of clarity? Are you willing to name anybody, or is it at least a type that you'd look at? Annabel, the suggestion that Reform could get in and do no better with the civil service and the Quangos, well, obviously what PopCon exists to do is to argue we need a complete reboot of the system, not just a change of management. If they get that, will they win? And then I'll come on to Wendy and Iain. I mean, Howard was also asking, can you out-reform reform whilst also being Conservative? I know there's this line that keeps getting repeated that you can't out-Farage, right? This has now become accepted wisdom. But I wonder if that's actually the way of looking at it. I suppose you can't out-Coke Coca-Cola, but I was looking at sales in America. Diet Coke sells better than full-fat Coke. So does the electorate actually want Farage light? In which case, the Conservative Party might be in a pretty good position to provide it. You would think. But David, over to you. Annabel,
Vote for
Wendy.
the real thing.
Get it? Yeah.
I think a good chunk of the electorate already has out Farage, and that's the problem. On a lot of non-economic issues, the Overton window's moved a long way to the right, and there's a good chunk of it that's probably to the right of where Farage is now. So I think we have to be careful about making assumptions about where people are compared to where opinion actually is. On your question, I'm not going to name any names, I'm afraid. You probably have to infer from what I say, but there are certain things that we are obviously going to go to the election to campaign on if we get that far. The ECHR, net zero, wind down, and things I would like to see: more planning liberalisation, scrapping the Equalities Act, things like that are core Conservative propositions. And I don't think being a former leader of the party or a former minister should protect you if you're not willing to campaign on the core propositions of the party.
Elegantly put. Annabel, isn't the issue, whether it's a Reform government, a Conservative government, an amalgam, that the next right-of-centre government needs to reboot the state? It can't just try and navigate its way through the infrastructure that presently exists, which tilts virtually every decision in a higher tax, higher spend, higher regulation direction. If you don't reboot all of that, of course the next right-of-centre government will fail.
Yeah, that's right, and it's not just obviously the ideological leanings, but it's also the competency issue and the fact that the last Conservative administration was pulling levers and absolutely nothing was happening. So, how do they take on the blob? Well, there's all sorts of things they could do. The suggestion that we reduce the civil service headcount to what it was in 2016 is a good one. We need to dismantle a lot of the legislative frameworks that allow this constant drift towards the left. Harriet Harman's Equality Act, for instance, a lot of the employment regulations. We've been on a sort of labour market regulatory ratchet over the last couple of decades, and that all needs to be unpicked. I think the next centre-right government needs to be unafraid to put people who are centre-right into senior positions within the civil service. And I also think that the selection of parliamentary candidates is so important, because one of the big issues we've had over the last 15 years are politicians who are far too willing to capitulate to vested interests. They come under pressure from a single issue interest group, and they see an opportunity for a favourable headline, and before we know it, we've got another regulation in place with very little thought given to the unintended consequences. So I think you need politicians who are true Conservatives, who have conviction and are willing to stand up to that.
Thank you. Wendy, we heard the suggestion we could rebuild from the sort of grassroots up. You were touching on this in your remarks as well. I mean, it sort of sounds a good idea, doesn't it? But I mean, probably Reform's membership is now about twice that of the Conservative Party. Its activist base, I think, is probably 3 or 4 times that of the Conservative Party. How easy is it to actually say, well, yeah, fine, let's rebuild from the grassroots up, but we're starting at the Conservative Party's lowest membership base of our lifetimes, right? And it basically has ceased to exist in many areas where we're in 3rd or 4th place. Is that the strategy? But if so, how can you roll out that strategy given how poor the present baseline is?
I mean, I spoke quite a lot about building up from the grassroots because I fundamentally believe that is part of what we have to do. I think when it's easier, I appreciate, when there is a member of parliament and you've got an association and you've got a group of councillors. But I think where members of parliament work together with local councillors on local issues, often then raising them up through into parliament, that is a really good way of showing how we as Conservatives demonstrate what we stand up for, what we believe in. I think where we have infrastructure, we need to start and use that and try and build out. But also it's about recognising that people join our party for different reasons. Some will join the party because they want to talk policy. Some will want to get involved as a local councillor and get involved in public service. I've also got members who they join because they quite like some of our social events. And I can see people nodding. So we have to capitalise on all of that. And even if it is a small event, use that to build from. We will try in my constituency to reach out to friends in other constituencies where they no longer have a member of parliament, because I think that's important. It's about keeping the faith and rebuilding what that core base that we have left. It takes time. Some of it is hard work, but I think that's a really important part. And don't ever forget the councillor base that we have, because they are the ones that are often out there at the coal face. I can see Richard nodding there. Are you a councillor? Well, you say only a parish councillor, but parish councillors have a role to play as well. Having once served as a chair of my local parish council, you know, everybody in the village knows who you are, and my goodness, they will all come and tell you about every local issue, and they'll come and knock on your door and tell you as well. So thank you for what you do.
Iain, what of this out Farage thing? I mean, and it seems to me it might apply in some areas but not in others. Matthew Saeed, you may have heard him on the main stage yesterday, the very impressive journalist, also has the distinction, I think, of being the only person who's defected to the Conservative Party in the last year. But he made the point of saying, I don't think that Farage is a racist, but I do think he's a socialist on economic policy. I teased Lee Anderson on an online event that I had with him by saying, look, you know, Lee, I like you a lot, and I like Nigel Farage a lot. It's just on economics, I think you're a couple of dangerous pinko lefties. It seems to me there might be some things we need to out Farage on, but not others. But is that the right way of looking at the electoral dilemma of people who've gone from Conservative to Reform?
No, I think it absolutely is. And I think Farage is starting to give us a lot of opportunities, particularly on economic policy, because they've come out with things that they haven't costed, which would cost tens of billions of pounds. And in the end, that is a major selling point, or has up until the last few years been a major selling point for the Conservative Party. They may think we're bastards, but they know that we can look after public money quite well. So you've got to get over the record of the last government on that. But in terms of out-Faraging Farage, you will be holding a similar event to this over the next 3 years at this conference. I will guarantee you that in 2027, the main theme, what happens after the election? Should the Conservative Party go into a pact with Reform, and should they announce it before the election? It will dominate our politics for probably 18 months up to the election. And Kemi Badenoch, and I hope she is still leaving the party at that point, has got a really difficult decision to make. Because if she gives any hint of going in with Reform, again, people say, well, I might as well vote for the real thing then. But after the election, it's a very simple choice. Do Conservatives want another 5 years of Keir Starmer, or do they want a right-wing government? Now, I know my answer to that. But it's a very difficult one because, I mean, David mentioned the FDP in Germany, who've been in successive coalitions. We all know what happened to the Liberal Democrats in 2015. Smaller parties in coalitions get wiped out at the following election. So it might not be, the next election might not be the extinction event for the Conservatives. It could be the one after that.
Well, at least you bought us some time, Ian, right? We take gentleman over there, and then these two on the front row. That will be it, I'm afraid. So the gentleman standing up there, there's two on the front row here. So again, introduce yourself, keep it snappy. We've only got a few minutes.
Yeah, my name's Richard Hunt from Southampton.
Great.
I just wanted to... It seems to me that we've kind of forgotten something here, that it's not just us that's suffering from reform. From what I can see, they're running riot in Labour areas as well. So it seems to be a bigger thing than just we don't like the Conservatives anymore. It's we don't like the two main parties, the establishment. And in the Maisie elections, I think Labour lost exactly percentage-wise same number of seats as we did. So it was quite a coordinated effort. That's not to say that I'm copying out, because we do need to do all the things that we talk about.
Okay. So is Reform just an anti-establishment party, not an alternative Conservative one? And here, Michael, you introduce yourself.
Michael Brackham, I'm from Joe's Cross. How might a future financial crisis under this incompetent Labour government impact the dynamics amongst the right-wing parties?
Really interesting question, that one. And Ben.
And mine's a very trivial one, but it seems to me that it all starts with leaders. Nigel Farage is by far and away the outstanding political leader of his generation. He knocks the other two into a cocked hat in the same way that Tony Blair was and Margaret Thatcher was. The terrible truth is that the Conservative Party is on its 10th leader since Margaret Thatcher, of varying degrees of mediocrity and awfulness, and that is one reason why the party is in the mess that it is.
Okay. Do you agree, I guess, is the way of rendering that into a question. Ian and Wendy, I know you might have to dash, so I'm going to go to Ian and Wendy to answer the questions, and if you need to skip out of the side door to make your next events, please do. Ian, I'll start with you, then Wendy. So Rich said Reform's just sort of it's mopping up Labour vote, it's mopping up the disillusion, it's a protest vote, is that?
Well, it is. There's always been a protest vote. It used to go to the Liberal Democrats. It's now going to Reform. A lot of the left-wing protest vote could actually go to the Greens. I mean, whatever you think of Zach Polanski, I think he's put he's put an accelerator under the Green Party. I think one question, again, moving to the long term, which comes off the back of that, is what if Nigel Farage does become Prime Minister? And what if he fails? Because we've had a failed Conservative government, we'll have had a failed Labour government. Where do the voters go if Nigel Farage and Reform fail in government? And that is quite a frightening prospect.
It could get very nasty.
It could get very nasty, and you can see circumstances, and we're already beginning to see it, of civil unrest in that. And I really fear that. And it's a subject that none of us really like to talk about, because you don't want to sort of encourage it almost, but you can't ignore it.
Which suggests if he does become Prime Minister, all good citizens should be willing him on to succeed, not to fail. Yeah. Wendy.
In terms of reform and their impacts on Labour, at times it does feel like their message is, we're not the establishment, we're different. I've had it thrown at me on panels, but I think the truth is Labour are very, very weak. The public have very, very quickly become disillusioned with Labour. But we're not in a strong enough position, and we haven't done that rebuild piece of work for them to start and come to us. And there is the new kid on the block offering an alternative. Very quickly, on the financial crisis, this would be really interesting, but I think this probably deserves a much longer discussion, actually, Mark. But what if there was a financial crisis? How would each party react to that? You have got parties with records, good or bad, but tried and tested, and we've got another party who we do not really fully understand what they would do in that situation.
This is really interesting. Annabel and David, pick up on anything you want, but I'm interested in Michael's point about a financial crisis at some point. Might that be, not that one would wish it on the country, but its electoral impact could suddenly play into Kemi's strategy, that actually people will suddenly be looking around for the people who can add up, the adults in the room. Oh my God, we can't take a risk. We need the sensible people who can operate a spreadsheet. One doesn't want to wish for it, but that's and it's not really a strategy. But could that fundamentally alter, polling and the status of the various parties? You couldn't perhaps risk going for Reform in that scenario.
Well, I would say that's wishful thinking, but I don't think anybody's wishing for another financial crisis. I take the point, the Leninist, the worse the better. If the economy goes through the floor and we have something like 20% unemployment, could that actually be a boon to the centre-right? I suspect it's unlikely to happen. I also think, were it to happen, that the left will probably be quite effective at blaming not just 14 years of Conservative failure, but also the free market, because of course what we have is a heavily regulated market at the moment, but that doesn't quite cut through in the same way. It's not like when Thatcher came in and we quite clearly had a socialist economy and that was what needed to be fixed. So I suspect that actually what we'd see is Labour government, the left, pandering to the absolute worst instincts of some members of the British public by bringing in things like a wealth tax and clobbering us even more, and making it worse, and perhaps clinging on to power that way.
David.
I think if there's a financial crisis, it would definitely benefit the right. The people who are in power when it happens always do badly. I don't think it's axiomatic that it helps us rather than reform, however, but that's the bigger question. On the question of who is the outstanding leader of the political generation, I do think people underrate Nigel Farage, I've got to say. I do think it is a completely implausible attack to suggest that he's some sort of socialist. I just don't believe it. When you look at what he stood for, when you look at what he'd written into the constitutional reform, I don't think that's a plausible...
He's a Thatcherite, really.
He's a Thatcherite. He always has been. I don't think it's a plausible attack for us to take. Reform is an anti-system party, definitely. That's what it's becoming. That means it won't necessarily be a purist right-wing party, but it will definitely be a right-wing party. And there are a lot of people who think the country has been run pretty badly over the last couple of decades and want an anti-system party. And I guess I'm part of that myself. I think it's been run quite badly over the last couple of decades. Lady Thatcher, not to keep coming back to her because I think it's not necessarily helpful, but one of her achievements was that she, to some extent, behaved as an anti-system politician as well. That the country had run into the buffers in the 70s, something different had to be tried, and all the people who were responsible for it, she kind of obviously dismissed them and disliked them. And I think we underestimate the appeal of anti-establishment, anti-system politics at our peril, because our record is very poor. Everybody can see that, and if we can reinvent ourselves into something different, then I think it's going to be extremely difficult to recover.
Just before I thank our panellists and give you a couple of housekeeping updates, I mean, I said we'd attempt to solve this problem in an hour. I'm reminded of the first case taken by the great barrister and statesman F.E. Smith. I think his first case was an extremely complicated fraud trial, if I remember rightly, and his opening statement was longer than an hour, at which point the judge said to him, Smith, I've been listening to you for an hour and I'm none the wiser. Yes. And he said, my lord, you may be none the wiser, but you are most assuredly better informed. So I don't know if we've necessarily made you wiser on how we might tackle the future of the right, but I hope you feel better informed. To remind you, the next, there's a question time panel in this 10 at 5:45 p.m. Please come along to that. I'll be on it, so it'd be nice to have an audience. 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, I'll be also back in the 10 in conversation with the great David Starkey on what he thinks the solution is for the next right of centre government. So I hope we've given you some food for thought. I hope we've lifted your spirits at least a little. Thanks so much for packing out this event, and please join me in thanking our 4 superb panellists. Thank you all.
Thank you, Matt.
Bless you.